Not all cruelty is chaotic. There is a kind of cruelty that is meticulously organized. It is systematized, written into manuals, and executed by those who believe they are doing God's work. This is the story of one of history's most terrifying bureaucratic machines, the machine of the Spanish Inquisition. We are not talking about frenzied mobs. We are talking about memos, procedures, and rules. When Spain unified in the late 15th century, fanaticism was at its peak. The new nation needed absolute uniformity. The greatest threat was not an external enemy, but the enemy within. Those suspected of heresy, especially the conversos, Jews and Muslims, who had converted to Christianity, but were suspected of secretly practicing their old faiths. And to purge this threat, they needed a process. The man who provided that process was Tomás da Cumana. Torquemada was an administrator, an architect of fear. He did not invent cruelty. He simply standardized it, turning an old system of heresy hunting into a national machine of terror. Their underlying operational philosophy seemed to be, it is better to wrongly capture 10 innocent people than to miss one heretic. And this is how the machine began to work. It all began with a whisper. The Inquisition would arrive in a town and issue an edict of grace. This was a brilliant psychological trap. The people were given 30 days to confess their own heretical acts and receive mercy. But more importantly, they were encouraged to denounce others. Neighbor denounced neighbor. The motive was not just piety. It was personal revenge. It was greed. Because when a person was convicted, their entire property was confiscated. The Edict of Grace weaponized suspicion and turned the entire community into a network of eyes and ears for the Inquisition. When the 30 days ended, the machine began to tighten its grip. Imagine you are a blacksmith in Seville. You live an honest life. You believe in God. You have done nothing wrong. But perhaps you refuse to lend your neighbor money. Perhaps your shop is more successful than his. One night, there is a knock on the door. Knock. Not a hurried knock. It is the slow, deliberate knock of authority. When you open the door, they are standing there. Men in dark robes, representatives of the Inquisition. They carry no obvious weapons. They carry authority. They do not explain. They do not argue. They simply tell you that you must come with them. Your family is stunned. Your wife asks what they are doing, but she is pushed aside. Your children cry. But the soldiers of the Inquisition do not react. They are just silent. You are escorted into the street. Your neighbors, the same ones who greeted you just yesterday, now watch from their windows. They see you being taken away, and no one dares to say a word. No one dares to intervene. Because if they intervene, they will be next. You are taken to a place you do not know, a secret prison of the Inquisition. Immediately, everything is stripped from you. Your name, your clothes, and most importantly, all contact with the outside world. You are thrown into a dark, damp cell. The real torture is the silence and the absolute isolation. You don't know why you are here. You don't know who denounced you. Time loses all meaning. Your mind begins to feed on itself, preparing you for the arrival of the Inquisitor. They leave you there. For weeks, sometimes months, the psychological breakdown is deliberate. They are softening you up. Then one day, the door opens. You are taken to another room, not a torture chamber. Not yet. This is the hearing room. The only light shines on a table. Behind the table sits the Inquisitor. He does not scream. He is a scholar, a lawyer, a theologian. He speaks softly. He seems concerned for your soul. He explains that the Inquisition is a merciful institution. Its purpose is not to punish the body, but to save the soul. He tells you that he knows you are guilty. The evidence is irrefutable, but he wants to give you a chance. This is the second psychological blow, the manipulation of hope. The Inquisitor will never tell you what you are accused of. He will say, "My son, Confess. Tell me your sins yourself. Only then can God's mercy forgive you. You are confused. You insist on your innocence. At this, the Inquisitor sighs. He changes tactics. He says, I believe you. I truly do. But the others in the tribunal, they don't believe you. They want to take you to the torture chamber immediately. They are waiting outside. I am the only one protecting you. He plays the role of the good man. He creates an imaginary enemy. Now, he says, help me save you. Just confess to a small sin, anything, so I can show them you are repentant. If you don't give me something, I can't stop them any longer. You are desperate. You start trying to guess. Is it because I ate meat on a Friday? The Inquisitor shakes his head, writing something down. No, that sin is not big enough for them to arrest you. Keep going. You panic. You begin to confess every petty sin you have ever committed. You lie that you heard a blasphemous word. You lie that you had a heretical thought. The more you talk, the tighter the trap becomes. You are writing your own conviction. If you steadfastly maintain your innocence, the Inquisitor will sigh one last time. His voice becomes disappointed and cold. IG tried to save you with words, but you are too stubborn. Your silence is proof that the devil has possessed you. And this is when the process changes. The Inquisitor stands up. He says that he has failed to save your soul. Now, he is forced to hand your body over to a different procedure. He, as a clergyman, is forbidden from shedding blood. That is the law. Therefore, he will relax the rules and let other specialists take over. The hypocrisy is absolute. He has just legalized what is about to happen. He calls these men technical operators. They enter the room. They are not theologians. They are muscular men, craftsmen. They don't carry books. They carry ropes. They carry jugs of water. They carry metal. The Inquisitor leaves the room. But he will stand just outside the door, listening. And the real interrogation begins. The technical operators were in no hurry. They were craftsmen. Their job was to deconstruct a person, and they had a process. They ignored you. They checked their tools. They tested the ropes. They filled the water jugs. This silence was part of the technique. You were watching the people who were about to hurt you. Your fear was mounting. And that was exactly what they wanted. Outside the door, the Inquisitor and a scribe were listening. Every moan, every plea, every confession would be recorded. The Inquisition was a meticulous bureaucracy. Everything had to be documented. This was not a back alley beating. This was a legal procedure. They tied your hands behind your back. Very tightly. The coarse rope chafed your wrists. They threw the other end of the rope over a pulley attached to the ceiling. This was la garuca, the pulley method. They began to pull. You were lifted off the ground. At first, it was just your own weight, but then the pain began. It started in your wrists, but quickly spread to your shoulders. Your arms were being pulled from their sockets. A dry sound, pop. That was the sound of your shoulders dislocating. The pain was blinding. It blurred your vision. You couldn't breathe. You couldn't think. You could only scream. Your screams were muffled in the stone room. And just when you thought you couldn't endure another second, they dropped you. You fell, but they didn't let you hit the ground. The rope snapped taut when you were just inches from the floor. Your entire body weight was yanked back by your two shattered shoulder joints. The pain was now unimaginable. It was no longer pain. It was an absolute event, obliterating everything else. They raised you slightly, just enough for you to gasp for air. Through the haze of pain, you heard the scribe's voice, cold and emotionless. Does the accused confess? You shook your head. You couldn't speak. They pulled you up again. This time, they attached weights to your feet. But let's say you were particularly stubborn. Let's say your will was stronger than your body. They would lower you down. They'd give you a few minutes, and they'd move on to the second technique, la toca, the water torture. They strapped you to a board or a ladder, but they strapped you in a specific way. Your head was lower than your feet. The blood rushed to your brain. The disorientation was immediate. Then, they took an iron clamp, like a blacksmith's tool. They forced your chin, prying your mouth open. You tried to bite. You tried to struggle. But you were bound. Your shoulders were ruined. You had no strength left. An operator took a piece of linen, not a rag, a clean cloth. He carefully stuffed it into your mouth. He pushed it down your throat. You began to gag. The feeling of suffocation was instinctive. Then the other one picked up a jug of water. He began to pour. He didn't pour quickly. He poured a small, steady stream. The water soaked through the linen cloth. You couldn't swallow. You couldn't breathe. The water filled your throat. It ran into your nose. This wasn't the feeling of being held underwater. This was the feeling of drowning from the inside out. You were drowning on dry land. The cloth prevented you from inhaling, and the water prevented you from exhaling. Your lungs were screaming for air. Your body convulsed violently on the board. But they held you fast. This panic was a different kind of pain. It was primal. It was the pure terror of extinction. Just as your lungs felt like they would burst, they stopped. They pulled the cloth out, one quick ripping motion. The soaked, slimy cloth pulled out blood and the lining of your throat with it. You coughed violently, vomiting water and air. You took a shuddering, agonizing breath. The scribe's voice chimed in again. Does the accused confess? This was calculated cruelty. They knew exactly how much the human body could take. Often, a doctor would be present. But the doctor wasn't there to heal you. The doctor was there to advise the operators. The doctor would say, "Stop, he's about to faint." Or, "Continue. He can still take it." The goal was not to kill you. Killing you was a failure. The goal was a confession. They poured the second jug, then the third. Each time was as horrific as the first. Finally, you broke. Everyone broke. It was just a matter of time. "Stop," you screamed. "I confess. I confess." The operator stopped. They undid your bonds. They dropped you onto the floor like a pile of rags. You were vomiting, you were shaking, your shoulders hanging uselessly. You thought it was over. You had confessed. You had given them what they wanted, but you were wrong. You were catastrophically wrong. The physical nightmare might have paused, but the bureaucratic nightmare was only just beginning. The Inquisition had a rule. A confession obtained under torture was not legally valid. Your confession in that room was, technically, worthless. They took you back to your cell. They left you there. 1 day, 2 days. Long enough for the acute pain to settle into a throbbing, dull ache. Long enough for the fear of returning to that room to seep into your very cells. Then, they brought you back. Not to the torture chamber, but to the hearing room. The Inquisitor sat there, still gentle, still concerned. He said, "My son, the other day, in your agitation, you said some things. Now, in the calm of this room, with no coercion, tell me the truth. This was the final trap. If you retracted your confession, if you said, 'I only lied so you would stop,' the Inquisitor would sigh. He would say that your torture had been unfortunately interrupted, and he would order the session to be continued, not a new session, just a continuation of the old one. But if you repeated your confession, 'Yes, I am a heretic. I did it,' then the scribe would write. The accused, being fully recovered, free from coercion, and of sound mind, has voluntarily ratified his confession. The trap had snapped shut. The machine had what it needed. Your voluntary confession was now legalized, and your sentence was sealed.
The silence in the hearing room was different now. It was no longer threatening. It was final. The Inquisitor nodded, satisfied. He had done his job. He had saved your soul, and he had obtained the necessary legal your voluntary confession. He turned the pages. He stamped the seal of the Inquisition upon it. It was the only sound in the room, a heavy, definitive thud. You felt no relief. You did not feel saved, you just felt empty. You had traded everything just for the pain to stop, and now that the pain had stopped, you realized that you had lost. Completely. You were taken back to your cell, but everything had changed. You were no longer a suspect to be broken. You were a confessed sinner, awaiting your sentence. They threw food at you. They might have even bandaged your shoulder. The machine no longer needed to hurt you. It just needed you to survive long enough for the final show. You waited. This time, the wait was not a psychological weapon to wear you down. It was a bureaucratic procedure. You were waiting for the next big event. An event called the Otoda, an act of faith. While you waited in the dark, the machine outside was operating at full speed. The moment your confession was signed, the Inquisition ordered the confiscation of your property. They didn't wait for a final sentencing. Your confession was enough. The Inquisition's soldiers went to your blacksmith shop. They shuttered it. They went to your home. They threw your wife and children out onto the street. They took everything, the house, the furniture, the anvil and hammer you used to make a living, your savings, every coin. Your family, now branded as the family of a confessed heretic, was left destitute and socially ostracized. No one dared to help them, for fear they, too, would be implicated. This was the machine's silent, but most powerful, engine. Fanaticism, certainly, but also greed. The Spanish Inquisition was a self-funding enterprise. It was financed by its own victims. Your confession paid the Inquisitor's salary, the technical operator's wages, and filled the coffers of the king and the church. Your ruin was their profit. Then one day, the cell door opened. They didn't take you to the hearing room. They brought something to you. Clothes. This was not normal clothing. This was the uniform of shame. It was called the sun, a sleeveless tunic, the color of saffron yellow. Yellow was the color of infamy. And on this tunic, they painted demons fanning the flames of hell. They painted an image of you, yourself, being consumed by fire. This was the sign that you were an unrepentant heretic, a soul already condemned. They gave you something else, a tall, pointed paper hat. The carroza, it was also painted with similar symbols. You were forced to put them on. The garment was coarse, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the absolute humiliation it represented. You were no longer a person, you were a symbol, a walking lesson for the public. You were proof of the Inquisition's great work. The morning of the Otoda arrived. The entire city was in a festive mood. This was a major event. Shops were closed. People from surrounding villages poured in. They wore their best clothes. They brought food. They jostled in the streets, trying to get the best viewing spots. You were dragged from your cell. You were not alone. There were dozens of others. Men and women, old and young. Some wore simple sanbenitos, with only a cross. They were the ones who had confessed early. They would receive mercy, public flogging, perhaps, or a sentence to the galleys. But you, and a few others, you wore the tunics painted with flames. You were the main event. They made you walk barefoot on the cobblestone streets. The crowd roared. They threw garbage at you. They screamed, "Heretic! Burn him!" These people, your former neighbors, they weren't doing this out of hatred. They were doing it out of fear, and because it was part of the event, a perfectly orchestrated mass hysteria. The humiliating parade ended in the main square. A massive stage had been erected. The highest officials of the church and the state were seated there. The Inquisitor was there, in his most splendid robes. You were forced to stand. A long mass was held, hours of prayers and sermons. The sun beat down. You were exhausted. You were humiliated, but you had to stand. Then, the most important part began. The scribe stood up and read the sentences. Your name was called, the name of the blacksmith from Seville, and the scribe read your confession aloud. Every detail, every petty lie you had fabricated in the hearing room, every heretical thought you had admitted to, it was read for the entire world to hear. For your wife, if she dared to be in the crowd. For your former friends. This was the final destruction, not just of your body, but of your name, your honor, and your legacy. When the sentence was read, The Inquisitor stood. He declared that the Inquisition, in its infinite mercy, had succeeded in saving your soul from eternal damnation. The Church's work was done. And then he spoke the final, most hypocritical words. He declared that the Church never sheds blood. The Church does not punish the body. Therefore, the Holy Inquisition would now relax you to the secular authorities, for the king to enact justice. The king's soldiers stepped forward. They did not wear church robes. They wore armor. They seized your arms, the same arms ruined by La Garrucha. The Inquisitor turned away. He had washed his hands of it. He had his confession. He had your property. And now he had his public display of power. The soldiers dragged you away, through the cheering crowd, toward another corner of the square, where wooden stakes had been erected, where the smoke was already beginning to rise. The Quemadero, the burning place. This was the final stop. The Quemadero, the burning place. It was not located in the center of the square. It was usually placed just outside the city gates. The machine had displayed its power in the city. Now it was time to dispose of the waste. The king's soldiers tied you to the wooden stake, roughly and definitively. Ropes were wrapped around your chest, waist, and ankles. Dry wood and kindling were piled high around your feet. They smelled of dry resin and dust. The crowd had followed you. They formed a large circle, keeping a safe distance from the coming fire, but close enough to see everything. They were no longer shouting. They were waiting. A strained, expectant silence fell over them. You were not alone. There were other stakes, other people who wore the same San Benito robe as you, those who had refused to confess, or those who had confessed but whose sins were too great for mercy. You looked into the crowd. You tried to find a familiar face. A friend, your wife, but you saw nothing but strange eyes. Curious eyes. Eyes. A priest in a black robe stepped in front of you, not the Inquisitor. He was a lower rank. His job was to perform the final ritual. He held up a wooden cross. His voice rang out, cutting through the crackle of the torches being prepared. My son, even now, at this final hour, God's mercy is open to you. Renounce your heresy. Kiss this cross. Die as a Christian. This was a final choice. A final psychological torture. The machine was offering you an escape. A mercy you could refuse. You could spit in his face. You could scream that you were innocent. You could curse the Inquisition for destroying you. If you did this, you would die as a stubborn heretic. The priest would nod, and the executioner would set the torch to the kindling at your feet. You would be burned alive. It was a slow, terrifying death. The fire would lick at your legs first. It would burn the flesh. The heat would boil your blood. Your lungs would seize from the smoke. You would scream. You would convulse against the stake, and the crowd would watch every second. They would see it as God's righteous punishment. But there was another option. You could accept. You were exhausted. You were broken. Your shoulders still throbbed. Your name was destroyed. Your family was shattered. You had nothing left to fight for. You just wanted it to end. You nodded. You leaned forward, kissing the wooden cross. The priest smiled. He blessed you. God has mercy on you. He gave a signal, but not to the man with the torch. He signaled to another man, a man standing behind your stake, whom you had not seen. The executioner. This man held a tool, not a hammer, not a sword. It was the garrote, a simple rope, or an iron collar. With a screw, he looped the rope around your neck. He placed a stick into the knot at the back, and he began to twist. The rope tightened. Your trachea was crushed. Your cervical spine snapped. You couldn't scream. You couldn't breathe. Blood rushed to your brain. Your eyes bulged. Everything went black. This was the mercy the Inquisition granted you. You were allowed to die before the flames touched you. When you were dead, when your body was just a corpse dangling from the stake. Only then did the priest nod to the torchbearer. Begin. The fire was lit. The pyre erupted. The flames consumed your lifeless body. But you didn't feel it. You had been forgiven. The crowd watched. They saw the flames rise. They saw the black smoke curl into the Seville sky. They had seen justice served. They had seen the faith protected. They returned to their homes, feeling safer, feeling cleaner. The machine had won. It had taken your life. It had taken your property. It had taken your name. And in the end, it even took your death. It turned your execution into a lesson. It turned your torture into a legal procedure. The history of the Spanish Inquisition is not a story of savage monsters. It is a far more terrifying story. It is the story of cruel bureaucrats, of scholars, of lawyers, of men who absolutely believed in their mission. Men who wrote the rules, who meticulously documented every scream, and who legalized every atrocity in the name of saving souls. They perfected a system where the truth did not matter. The confession did. They understood that if you control a person's pain, you control their reality. They turned the human body into a battlefield, and the mind into a prison. And when the last fire died, when only ash and charred bone remained, the Inquisition's soldiers would clean up. They would collect your ashes. They would not give them to your family. They would throw them into the river, to ensure that no trace of you remained on this earth. The purge was complete. The machine moved on.